"What the hell are you doing with my sons?" Richard Brown's voice cut through the room like a blade. Jasmine Clark froze. She was kneeling on the floor, both boys, Caleb and Joshua, pressed against her, their small hands gripping her shirt. Her heart slammed in her chest. "Mr. Brown, please, they were hurting themselves. I was just what?" His voice rose. "I gave you one rule. Stay away from my children. Was that too complicated?" The twins looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, but they didn't let go of her. And in that moment, Richard saw something that made his blood run cold. 3 days earlier, Richard Brown had been certain no one could reach his sons. Caleb and Joshua weren't just difficult, they were violent, unreachable. Ever since their mother Lauren died 2 years ago, the boys had become something Richard didn't recognize. They bit, they scratched, they screamed until the walls shook. 17 nannies in 8 months. All of them quit. Richard spent over $400,000 on specialists. Nothing worked, so he stopped trying. He hired Jasmine Clark to clean his house, not to fix his children. Her job was simple: stay in the East Wing, away from the boys. But on day 3, Jasmine heard something she couldn't ignore: a child in pain. She dropped everything and ran to the playroom. Inside, Caleb was throwing blocks. Joshua was banging his head against the wall. The current nanny was locked in the bathroom, crying. Jasmine didn't call for help. She sat down on the floor between them, closed her eyes, and started humming an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. Trouble don't last always. Within minutes, both boys were asleep in her arms. That's when Richard walked in. He'd gotten a frantic call about another episode. He came home expecting chaos. Instead, he found his violent, unreachable sons peaceful in the arms of a woman he'd hired to clean floors. "What the hell are you doing with my sons?" Jasmine stood carefully. "Mr. Brown, they were hurting themselves. I just sat with them." "You had no right." His voice was ice. "Get out. You're done." She didn't argue. She knelt down one last time. "I have to go, sweethearts. But you're going to be okay." Caleb's eyes opened. His small voice broke. "Like Mama?" Jasmine's tears fell. "No, baby. Not like Mama. I promise." She walked out. The second she left, both boys started screaming, reaching for her, calling a name Richard didn't even know they'd learned. He had to hold them back while they clawed at his chest, crying for her to come back. And Richard realized something that made him sick. He'd just fired the only person who could reach his sons. That night, he watched the security footage, over and over, watching Jasmine sit in chaos while his boys, his broken, angry boys, moved toward her like she was the only thing that made sense. By dawn, Richard was dressed, keys in hand. He was going to find her and bring her back. But before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because if you've ever wondered whether God still sees you in your darkest moment, this story will show you that He does. And sometimes, He sends someone who doesn't have all the answers, just a heart brave enough to sit with you in the pain. 3 days earlier, Richard had been certain no one could reach his sons. 17 nannies in 8 months. All of them quit. Nanny number 14, left with bite marks on her arm. Nanny number 15 was locked in a closet while the boys poured juice through the door. Nanny number 17 didn't even last an hour. She called security from the driveway and refused to come back. Richard spent $400,000 on specialists, child psychologists, behavioral therapists, people with credentials and decades of experience. Nothing worked. Caleb and Joshua were 4 years old and hadn't spoken in months. They hit, they screamed, they broke things. Ever since their mother died 2 years ago, they'd become children Richard didn't recognize. And honestly, he'd stopped trying to recognize them, because every time he looked at his sons, all he saw was Lauren's face the night she died, and he couldn't breathe through that. So he hired people to do it for him. Mrs. Halloway, his estate manager, finally said what everyone was thinking. "Sir, maybe we need to step back from the childcare crisis and just focus on keeping this house running. Let me hire someone for cleaning. You can figure out the boys separately." Richard agreed, without looking up from his desk. By Friday, Mrs. Halloway had found someone. Her name is Jasmine Clark, 28. Quiet. Good references. She'll start Monday. "Fine. And sir? I'm keeping her in the East Wing only, away from the boys. She's here to clean, not to get involved in whatever's happening upstairs." Richard nodded. "Good. Monday morning, Jasmine Clark stood outside the Brown estate, looking up at the house. It was beautiful, cold, the kind of house that looked perfect on the outside and broken on the inside. She'd seen houses like this before. Mrs. Halloway met her at the door. "You'll work in the East Wing living room, kitchen, main hallways. The West Wing is off limits. That's where the family's private quarters are." "The children?" Jasmine asked. Mrs. Halloway's expression shifted. Something sad, something tired. "Mr. Brown's sons live in the West Wing. You won't see them. And that's for the best, dear." "Understood." "Good." The older woman started to leave, then stopped. "Miss Clark, you seem like a sweet girl. This is good pay. Please don't cross any boundaries." "I won't." But even as she said it, Jasmine heard something from upstairs. A crash, then another, then a child's voice, high and desperate, breaking apart. Mrs. Halloway's face went tight. "Just ignore that. It'll pass." She left. Jasmine stood alone in the hallway, gripping her mop, listening to the sound coming from upstairs. Crashes, screaming, not anger, something deeper, pain. She'd heard that sound before, in her own voice, 22 years ago, after the fire that killed her parents. Jasmine forced herself to start cleaning, but the sound wouldn't stop. And something inside her knew. Someone upstairs was screaming, and no one was listening. Day one was quiet. Jasmine cleaned with careful hands. Hardwood floors, marble counters, rooms that were perfect and empty at the same time. She noticed things. Photos of a beautiful blonde woman everywhere, laughing, glowing, alive. But all of them were old. 2 years, maybe more. No recent pictures, no children's drawings on the refrigerator, no toys left out. No signs that a family actually lived here. Just silence. And from upstairs, occasionally, the sound of something breaking. Day 2 was the same. Jasmine kept her head down, stayed in the East Wing like she'd been told, but she couldn't stop hearing it. Crashes from the West Wing, screaming, then long stretches of nothing. She saw the current nanny once, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, moving through the hallway like she was walking through a war zone. "Are you okay?" Jasmine asked. The woman looked at her like she'd asked something insane. "Stay away from those boys," she whispered. "They're not right." Then she disappeared up the stairs. Jasmine went back to mopping, but her chest felt tight. Something was wrong in this house. Something deeper than dirt or disorder. Day 3 started the same. Jasmine was cleaning the second-floor hallway, close to the West Wing, but not crossing the invisible line Mrs. Halloway had drawn. Then she heard it. Not a tantrum, not anger. The sound of a child breaking. Crash, crash, crash. Rhythmic, desperate. Then screaming raw, painful, like something inside was tearing apart. Jasmine's hands froze on the mop handle. She knew that sound. Footsteps pounded past her. The nanny, mascara streaking down her face, ran into the bathroom and locked the door. "I can't," the woman sobbed from inside. "I can't do this anymore." Jasmine stood there, heart racing. Mrs. Halloway was downstairs. Mr. Brown wasn't home, and upstairs, a child was hurting. She dropped the mop. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. The playroom door was half open. Inside, one boy was throwing wooden blocks at the wall. Not hard, just lost, like he didn't know what else to do with his hands. The other boy sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, banging his head against the bookshelf. Slow, steady, trying to make something stop that wouldn't stop. The room was destroyed, toys everywhere, books ripped, a picture frame on the floor, glass shattered, the blonde woman's face smiling up from the wreckage. The boys didn't even see Jasmine. They were trapped somewhere inside themselves. She remembered that place. She'd been there once, at 6 years old, after the fire. Jasmine didn't call for help, didn't grab them, didn't shout. She walked into the room, sat down on the floor between them, and closed her eyes. For 5 minutes, she just breathed. Then, softly, she started to hum. An old hymn, the one her grandmother used to sing when the world felt too big and too broken. Trouble don't last always. The boy throwing blocks slowed. The one banging his head stopped. Both of them turned toward her voice. And slowly, so slowly, they moved closer. One leaned against her left side, the other against her right. Jasmine's arms came around them without thinking. "I know," she whispered. "I know it hurts." That's when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, fast, angry. The door slammed open. Richard Brown stood there, phone in his hand, fury in his eyes. And Jasmine knew. She'd just crossed the line she wasn't supposed to cross. "What the hell are you doing?" Richard's voice wasn't loud. It was cold, sharp. The kind of anger that cuts deeper than shouting. Jasmine looked up, still holding the boys. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Mr. Brown, please. I gave you one instruction." He stepped into the room. "Stay away from my sons. One simple instruction. Was that too difficult?" The boys whimpered and pressed closer to Jasmine. She stood slowly, carefully, trying not to disturb them. "Sir, they were hurting themselves. I heard them and You just what? Decided you knew better than everyone I've paid to help them." His eyes went to the destroyed room, the blood on Joshua's forehead, the welts on Caleb's hands. "Are they hurt? Did you?" "No." Jasmine's voice was steady. "I didn't touch them until they were ready. I just sat with them." Richard stared at her, at his sons, quiet now, holding on to this woman like she was the only solid thing in their world. "You don't know anything about my sons," he said, his voice lower now but no less final. "You've been here 3 days. I know what it looks like when a child is grieving and no one speaks their language." The words hung between them. Richard's jaw clenched. "Get out. You're done here. Mrs. Holloway will handle your final pay." Jasmine didn't argue. She knelt down, looked at Caleb and Joshua. Their eyes were wide, scared. "I have to go, sweethearts," she whispered. "But you're going to be okay. I promise." Caleb's small voice cracked. "Like Mama?" The question stopped everything. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. She touched his cheek gently. "No, baby, not like Mama. I'll be okay. I promise." She stood, walked past Richard without looking at him. The second she crossed the threshold, both boys started screaming. "No, Jazzy, come back." They tried to run after her. Richard had to grab them, hold them back. Their small fists pounded his chest. Their voices ripped through the house, raw and desperate. "Please, don't go. Don't leave us." Richard held them tight, but they fought him, screaming, reaching toward the empty doorway. And Richard felt something crack inside his chest, something he'd kept locked for 2 years. Because his sons weren't screaming at Jasmine leaving, they were screaming because everyone they loved left, and he'd just made it happen again. In the hallway, Mrs. Holloway stood with an envelope. "I tried to warn you," she said quietly. Jasmine took the envelope without opening it. Her hands were shaking. "They're not bad children, Mrs. Holloway. They're just scared. Mr. Brown won't hear that." "He should," Jasmine's voice broke, "because he's teaching them to grieve alone. And that's the cruelest thing you can do to a child." The screaming upstairs got louder. Mrs. Holloway looked up, then back at Jasmine. "What did you do in there? In all my years I've never heard them sound like that." "I didn't do anything." Jasmine wiped her eyes. "I just didn't run away." Upstairs, Richard sat against the wall, both boys finally exhausted in his arms. They'd screamed for 20 minutes straight. Now they just hiccuped and shook, faces buried in his shirt. The room still smelled like lavender. Like her. Caleb clutched the blue cleaning cloth Jasmine had dropped. Joshua's fingers gripped the air, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Within minutes, both boys were asleep. Richard sat there, staring at nothing. It was the first time he'd held them like this in over a year, the first time they'd let him, and it only happened because they were broken. He looked down at their faces. Lauren's eyes, Lauren's nose, Lauren's everything. His chest felt tight. He pulled out his phone, opened the security app, found the footage from 20 minutes ago, and watched. Jasmine walking into chaos, blocks flying past her head. She didn't even flinch. She sat down, closed her eyes, just breathed while the world fell apart around her. Then the humming started. His sons stopped, turned, moved toward her like she was gravity. Richard's hands trembled as he watched. He whispered to the empty room, "What did you do?" But even as he said it, he knew that was the wrong question. The right question was, what did they see in you that they don't see in me? Richard didn't leave the playroom for hours. He sat on the floor with his sons, sleeping in his arms, afraid that if he moved, they'd wake up screaming again. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. By 11, Mrs. Holloway knocked softly. "Sir, should I help you get them to bed?" "No." His voice was rough. "I've got them." He carried the boys to their room, one at a time, laid them in their beds. They didn't wake up, just curled around the blue cloth Jasmine had left behind, holding it like it was the only thing keeping them safe. Richard stood there watching them sleep. When was the last time he'd tucked them in? When was the last time he'd been in this room after dark? He couldn't remember. Downstairs, Richard went to his study, closed the door, sat at his desk in the dark. He opened his laptop and pulled up Jasmine's file. It was thin, almost empty. High school diploma, 3 years of housekeeping experience, 2 references from families she'd worked for. He'd barely looked at it when he hired her, just scanned for red flags and moved on. Now he read every word. One reference stood out. A family in Atlanta. Jasmine was wonderful with our home, but she was extraordinary with our son Marcus, who has autism. During his meltdowns, she was the only person he would let near him. She didn't try to fix him or calm him down. She just sat with him, and somehow that was enough. Richard read it 3 times. Then he opened the security footage. He watched day 1, Jasmine pausing in front of Lauren's photo in the hallway, her hand reaching out to touch the frame, her lips moving, whispering something he couldn't hear. Day 2, the boys having a tantrum downstairs, Jasmine stopping mid-task, her whole body tense, like every instinct was telling her to go help, but she didn't. She forced herself to stay in the East Wing like she'd been told. Day 3, the moment everything changed. Richard watched her walk into the playroom, watched blocks fly past her head. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She just sat down and closed her eyes. For 5 full minutes, she sat there while his sons raged around her. Then the humming started, barely audible on the camera, but he could see her lips moving. His son slowed, stopped, turned toward her, and moved closer, like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. Richard zoomed in on her face. Her eyes were closed, but tears were running down her cheeks. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to fix them. She was surviving with them. He watched the footage again and again. At midnight, Mrs. Halloway brought him tea. "Sir, you need to sleep." They slept, Margaret. His voice cracked. For the first time in weeks, they slept without medication, without 2 hours of screaming. They just slept. She sat down across from him, because she understood something the rest of us didn't. What? That they don't need someone to fix them. They need someone to see them. Richard put his head in his hands. "I can't even look at them without seeing her. Without seeing everything I lost." "I know." Lauren would have known what to do. She always knew. Mrs. Halloway's voice was gentle but firm. "Lauren would have hired someone who knew what to do. Which you did. You just sent her away." Richard looked up. "What am I supposed to do now?" "You know what you need to do." He did, but saying it out loud felt impossible. At 1 in the morning, Richard checked on the boys again. They were still asleep. Joshua was murmuring something. Richard leaned closer. "Jazzy, please don't go like Mama." The words hit him like a fist to the chest. They'd already named her, already attached to her. In 3 days, she'd become what 17 trained professionals couldn't become in 8 months. Safe. Richard sat in the rocking chair Lauren used to use, the one she'd nursed the boys in when they were babies. He remembered her voice, her laugh, the way she'd sing to them, and his silence after she died, his distance, his inability to look at his sons without falling apart. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the dark. "I'm so sorry." By dawn, Richard was showered, dressed, keys in hand. Mrs. Halloway found him in the kitchen. "Sir, it's 6:30 in the morning. Where are you going?" "To fix the biggest mistake I've ever made." She smiled, tired but relieved. "It's about time." Jasmine's apartment was cold. She sat at the small table by the window, staring at the eviction notice. 30 days. Her coffee had gone cold. An hour ago, her phone rang. The employment agency. "Miss Clark, we've been notified of your termination from the Brown residence." She closed her eyes. "I understand. We may have another placement available, but..." The woman paused. "This is your 2nd termination in 6 months, both for unauthorized contact with household members. It makes placement difficult." "I know." After the call ended, Jasmine sat there for a long time. $89 in her bank account. No job. Rent due in 3 weeks. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. She'd find something. She always did. The morning air bit at her face as she stepped outside. October in Boston was unforgiving. She didn't notice the black car parked across the street. Richard had been sitting there for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to say. "I'm sorry" didn't feel like enough. "I was wrong" felt too simple. "I need you" sounded desperate. But when Jasmine came out of her building, wrapped in an oversized sweater, heading toward the bus stop, he got out before he could talk himself out of it. "Miss Clark." She turned. Her face shifted from confusion to something guarded. "Mr. Brown?" He walked toward her, hands in his pockets because he didn't know what else to do with them. "I need to talk to you. Please. If this is about the agency complaint, I'm not going to fight it." "There's no complaint." His voice cracked. "I came to apologize." Jasmine stopped walking. A bus rumbled past between them. When it cleared, they were just standing there on a Dorchester sidewalk. Two people who'd seen each other's pain and didn't know what to do with it. "My son slept through the night," Richard said quietly. "First time in 2 months. When they woke up this morning, they asked for you, by name. They haven't spoken full sentences in weeks, and they asked for Jazzy." Jasmine looked away, blinking hard. "I watched the footage. All of it." He took a step closer. "I saw what you did, how you sat there while everything fell apart around you, and they knew. Somehow they knew you weren't going to run. I broke your rules. My rules were wrong." He said it like he'd been practicing all night. "I want you to come back, not as a housekeeper, as someone who understands my sons in ways I don't." She shook her head. "Mr. Brown, I don't have degrees. I don't have training. You're someone who sees them." His voice dropped. "That's what they need. What I need." Jasmine studied his face, saw exhaustion, desperation, but also something else trying to survive beneath it all. "Hope. If I come back," she said slowly, "things have to be different. Whatever you need. I work with the boys, not around them. No more locked doors or forbidden rooms." "Agreed. And you have to be there too." She held his gaze. "Not hiding in your office. Present. With your sons. They need their father, not just his money." That one cost him. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened. But he didn't look away. "I'll try." "Trying isn't enough." Her voice was gentle but firm. "They need you there. Actually there." Long silence. A delivery truck rumbled past. "Yes," Richard finally said. "You're right. I'll be there." "When do you want me to start?" Richard glanced at his watch. "I have 2 little boys who've been asking for you for 8 hours. How about now?" Jasmine thought about her eviction notice, her empty bank account, her uncertain future. Then she thought about Caleb and Joshua's faces pressed against her, their voices calling her name. "Let me get my things." The drive back was quiet at first. Richard kept his eyes on the road. Jasmine watched the city change her neighborhood, giving way to his. Buildings getting taller, streets getting cleaner. 2 different worlds. "Can I ask you something?" Richard broke the silence. "Yes. Yesterday, when you sat with them, you could have been hurt. They've hurt people before. Why didn't you just walk away?" Jasmine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When I was 6, my parents died in a house fire. I survived by hiding in a closet. For 3 years after, I didn't talk to anyone except my grandmother." Richard's hands tightened on the wheel. "Everyone tried to fix me. Doctors, therapists, teachers. They all had methods and strategies." She turned to look at him. "But my grandmother just sat with me, on the floor, in the quiet. She didn't try to make me talk or smile or be normal. She just stayed. And that helped? That saved me." Jasmine's voice was soft. "Your sons aren't broken, Mr. Brown. They're grieving. And grief doesn't need fixing. It needs witnessing." Richard didn't say anything. But she saw him wipe his eyes quickly, like he didn't want her to notice. When they pulled up to the house, Mrs. Halloway was on the front steps. Her face lit up when she saw Jasmine in the passenger seat. Oh, thank God. Before anyone could say anything, there was a sound from inside. Footsteps, fast, desperate. The front door flew open. Caleb and Joshua stood there in matching orange shirts, their faces going from confusion to shock to something that looked like they'd just found air after drowning. Jazzy. They didn't walk. They ran. Full speed. No hesitation. Like children who'd just found the only thing in the world that made sense. Jasmine barely had time to kneel before they crashed into her. The impact nearly knocked her over. She caught them, held them, felt their small bodies shaking with relief. "You came back," Caleb whispered against her shoulder. "You came back. I promised you'd be okay," Jasmine said, her voice breaking. "I meant it." Joshua pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were wet. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed her cheek. Caleb did the same on the other side. Both at once. Pure, spontaneous, real. "We love you, Jazzy," they said together. And Jasmine couldn't stop the tears. "I love you too, babies. So much." Richard stood frozen by the car. His briefcase hung in his hand, forgotten. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. These were his sons, his violent, unreachable, broken sons, the boys who'd bitten, scratched, and terrorized 17 trained professionals. And they were kissing her, smiling, speaking in full sentences, showing affection he hadn't seen since Lauren died. They looked happy. When was the last time he'd seen them happy? Mrs. Halloway came up beside him, wiping her eyes with her apron. "Well," she whispered, "I guess that answers that." Richard's throat was tight. "How?" "I don't know, sir, but whatever it is, it's real." Jasmine carried both boys toward the house. They were small for 4, and they clung to her like she was the only thing keeping them tethered to earth. As she passed Richard, she paused. "Mr. Brown, would you like to come inside? The boys might want to show you something." He nodded. Couldn't find words. Inside, the boys led Jasmine to the playroom, the one that was still destroyed from yesterday. Richard followed slowly, staying in the doorway. Joshua picked up the broken picture frame with Lauren's photo. His face went serious. "Mama broke." Jasmine knelt down, taking the frame gently. "The glass broke, sweetheart, but Mama's not broken. She's just somewhere else now. Somewhere safe." "Heaven?" Caleb asked quietly. "That's what some people call it. A place where nothing hurts anymore." Joshua's voice got smaller. "Does she still love us?" Jasmine pulled both boys close. "Oh, baby. Yes, she loves you so much. Love doesn't stop just because someone goes away. It stays, right here." She touched Joshua's chest, then Caleb's. "Forever." Caleb looked up at her. "How do you know?" "Because my mama and daddy went to heaven when I was little, and I still feel their love, every single day." Richard's chest felt like it was caving in. This was the first time anyone had talked to his sons about Lauren directly. He'd forbidden it, thought it would upset them. But they weren't upset. They were processing. Jasmine looked up and saw him standing there. "Mr. Brown, would you like to help us clean up?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Caleb saw him. His whole face changed. "Daddy, Jazzy's back. We're cleaning for Mama." For Mama, not despite her, not forgetting her. For her. Richard's legs felt weak, but he walked into the room, sat down on the floor in his suit, and Joshua crawled into his lap, just like that. No hesitation. Richard went completely still. His arms came up slowly, carefully, like he was holding something that might shatter. But Joshua just pressed his face into Richard's chest and stayed there, breathing with him. And Richard realized something that broke him open completely. This was the first time he'd held his son like this in over a year. The first time Joshua had let him. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of mornings that didn't start with screaming. Breakfasts where Richard sat at the table with his sons instead of hiding in his office. Small moments that felt like miracles. Jasmine worked with the boys gently. She didn't push, didn't force. She'd sit with them in the garden and ask, "What does sad feel like? Where do you feel it in your body?" Caleb would point to his chest. "Here, like it's too heavy." "That's good, sweetheart. You're learning to name it." Joshua was quieter, but he was talking now. Full sentences. He'd tell Jasmine about his dreams, about Mama, about the things he missed. Richard watched from the kitchen window one afternoon, coffee in hand. His sons were laughing. Actually laughing. Playing in the garden with Jasmine, running through fallen leaves. When was the last time he'd heard that sound? Mrs. Halloway came up beside him. "They're different boys, sir." "I know. You're different too." Richard looked at her. "You smile now," she said simply. "Not often, but you do." He didn't know what to say to that. That evening, Richard came home early. Something he'd been doing more often now. He'd read to the boys before bed stories about brave knights and dragons, about children who got lost and found their way home. Caleb would curl up on his left side, Joshua on his right, and they'd just listen. Sometimes Joshua would fall asleep mid-story. Sometimes Caleb would ask questions. "Daddy, do you think Mama can hear us from heaven?" And Richard would have to swallow hard before answering, "I think she can, buddy. I think she hears everything." They were healing, slowly, carefully, like bones that had been broken and were finally starting to mend. But Saturday afternoon, everything shifted. The doorbell rang. Richard was in his study. Jasmine was upstairs with the boys, helping them organize their toys. Mrs. Halloway answered the door. Her face went pale. "Sir," she called up the stairs, her voice tight. "You have a visitor." Richard came down, wondering who would show up unannounced on a Saturday. Then he saw her. Patricia Whitmore stood in his foyer. Lauren's mother. Elegant, cold, designer suit, perfectly styled hair. She hadn't been to this house since the funeral 2 years ago, said it was too painful. Now she was here, surveying everything with sharp eyes. "Richard," her voice was controlled, clipped. "We need to talk about my grandsons." Something in her tone made Richard's stomach drop. This wasn't a friendly visit. "Patricia, I wasn't expecting." "No, I'm sure you weren't." She stepped further inside, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "I've been hearing some very disturbing reports from your neighbors about changes in this household, about a woman living here." Richard's jaw tightened. "I've hired a full-time caregiver for the boys." "A caregiver?" Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Is that what we're calling it?" Upstairs, Jasmine heard voices. She couldn't make out the words, but something in the tone made her uneasy. Caleb looked up at her. "Who's here?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Let's keep playing, okay?" But the voice downstairs got louder, sharper, and Jasmine knew whatever peace they'd built over the last 3 weeks was about to be tested. Patricia didn't waste time. In Richard's study, door closed, she laid it out clearly. "I've contacted my lawyers. I'm filing for emergency custody of Caleb and Joshua." Richard's blood went cold. "You're what?" "I'm protecting them." Her voice was calm, certain. "From whatever this situation is that you've created. A young woman living in this house with you and my grandsons. It's inappropriate, Richard, and when the courts hear about it, she's their caregiver. She's helped them more than anyone. She's a housekeeper with a high school diploma." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "And she's black, Richard. I'm not prejudiced, but you know how this looks. People are already talking. A wealthy widower, a young black woman living under his roof, caring for his children." "Stop." Richard stood up. "Stop right there." "I won't stop. Lauren trusted me to protect her sons, and I will not stand by while you jeopardize their futures because you're lonely, and she's what?" Richard's voice was ice. "Say it, Patricia. Say what you really mean." Patricia's face hardened. "I mean that I'm filing for custody, and when I do, she'll be gone, and my grandsons will be where they belong." Upstairs, Jasmine was packing. She'd heard enough. Heard Patricia's voice cutting through the house like a knife. Heard the words, inappropriate, and custody. She knew what this was, what it would become. Richard found her in her room, bag on the bed. "What are you doing? Making this easier for you?" She didn't look at him. "If I'm gone, she has no case. You're not the problem. I'm exactly the problem." Jasmine's voice cracked. "I'm a black woman caring for white children. In her eyes, in a lot of people's eyes, I'm either invisible or threatening. There's no in-between. Then we fight it. You can't fight 100 years of that in one courtroom, Richard." Before he could respond, they heard it. Small voices. At the door, Caleb and Joshua stood there, eyes wide, faces pale. "Jazzy's leaving." Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. Jasmine's heart shattered. "Sweethearts, No!" Both boys screamed it. They ran to her, grabbed her, held on like she was the only thing keeping them alive. "You promised," Joshua sobbed. "You promised you'd stay." "Everybody leaves." Caleb's voice broke. "Mama left. All the nannies left. You can't leave too." Jasmine dropped to her knees, pulling them close. "I don't want to. Babies. I don't." "Is it because we're bad?" Joshua whispered. Everything stopped. Richard knelt beside them. "What?" Caleb was crying now, his whole body shaking. "The nannies left because we were bad. We hit them and screamed at them." "Is Jazzy leaving because we're bad too?" "No." Jasmine's voice was fierce. "No, no, no. You are not bad. You have never been bad." "But we hurt people," Joshua said. "We broke things. We screamed. Because you were hurting, Jasmine said, cupping their faces. And no one knew how to help you feel better. But that doesn't make you bad. Richard's voice was thick. Boys, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago. They looked at him. It's my fault the nannies left. Because I didn't teach them how to understand you. I didn't even try to understand you myself. Why, Daddy? Caleb whispered. Richard's voice broke. Because looking at you hurt. Because you look like Mama, and it reminded me she was gone. So I hid. And that was wrong. So wrong. Joshua crawled into his lap. You were sad like us? Yes. I was sad like you. Jazzy says it's okay to be sad, Caleb said quietly. She says Mama would want us to be happy and sad. Richard looked at Jasmine over their heads. His eyes were wet. She's right, he whispered. She's absolutely right. And in that moment, something shifted. Richard stood, still holding Joshua. We're not hiding anymore. Not from Patricia. Not from anyone. We fight this together. Jasmine shook her head. Richard, if I stay, you could lose them. If you leave, I've already lost them. His voice was steady now. Clear. We do this right. We tell the truth. And we trust that the truth is enough. And if it's not, then we'll deal with it. But we'll deal with it as a family. The word hung in the air. Family. Jasmine looked at the boys. At Richard. At this broken, beautiful mess they'd somehow become. Okay, she whispered. We fight. The custody hearing lasted 3 hours. Patricia's lawyer painted the picture she wanted. Grieving widower, unstable home, unqualified caregiver, creating confusion for vulnerable children. Richard's lawyer presented video evidence. Before Jasmine, violent, non-verbal, isolated boys. After Jasmine, communicative, affectionate, healing children. The judge asked to speak with Caleb and Joshua privately. When he returned 30 minutes later, his face had softened. These children are remarkably articulate about their feelings, he said. They spoke about missing their mother, about being sad sometimes, about how Miss Clark helps them talk about their mama without feeling scared. He read from his notes. Caleb stated, Before Jazzy, we couldn't say Mama's name because Daddy would look too sad. Now we can remember her together. Patricia's face went pale. The judge removed his glasses. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand your concern comes from love, but the evidence shows these children are thriving. This court cares about results, not resumes. Petition denied. 3 months later, Patricia returned. No lawyer, no agenda. She stood on the front steps, holding a handwritten letter. I was wrong, she said to Jasmine directly. I saw what I was taught to see, not what was really there. Jasmine's throat tightened. You were protecting your daughter's memory. I understand that. Lauren would have loved you. Patricia's voice broke. She would have trusted you immediately. I couldn't see past my own grief. They stood there for a moment. Then Patricia reached for Jasmine's hand. Thank you, she whispered, for loving my grandsons when I was too broken to do it right. 6 months after that first doorway moment, Richard stood in the twins' bedroom, holding a framed photograph. It was the picture from that day. Caleb and Joshua in their orange shirts, kissing Jasmine's cheeks while she glowed with joy, her smile radiant, their faces peaceful. Richard had captured it on his phone, speechless, unable to process what he was seeing. Now he understood. He hung the frame on the wall beside photos of Lauren, not replacing her, honoring her by loving her sons the way she would have wanted. That evening, bedtime came with a new ritual. The boys knelt by their beds, hands folded. Caleb spoke first. God bless Mama in heaven. Tell her we're okay now. Joshua continued. And bless Jazzy here. Thank you for not letting her leave. Together, and bless Daddy. He's not scared anymore. Jasmine tucked them in, kissed their foreheads. Richard stood in the doorway, watching. She joined him in the hallway, and they stood in comfortable silence. Thank you, Richard whispered, for not running. Thank you for finally stopping hiding. From inside the room, Jazzy, Daddy, we love you. They answered together, we love you too. Later, Richard sat alone in his study, looking at the legal documents on his desk. Co-guardianship papers, signed, filed, official. If anything happened to him, Jasmine would raise his sons. Not the state, not distant relatives. Her. Because family isn't who you're born to. It's who stays when staying is hard. His sons had found their voice. He'd found his way back to fatherhood. And Jasmine had found what she'd been searching for since that fire 22 years ago, a home that wouldn't burn down. Richard looked up at the ceiling, toward where he imagined heaven might be. "I hope you see them, Lauren," he whispered. "I hope you see how loved they are." And in the quiet of that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Peace, not because the pain was gone, but because he'd finally stopped running from it. And in that surrender, he'd found something he never expected. Grace, God's perfect timing in the form of a woman who cleaned floors but healed souls. A woman who taught his sons to speak and taught him to listen. A woman who proved that sometimes the greatest love story isn't romance. It's the choice to stay when leaving would be easier. Upstairs, in a room now painted warm yellow instead of cold blue, 2 little boys slept peacefully, dreaming of their mama in heaven. And they're Jazzy here on earth, both loving them, both holding them, both part of the same story of redemption. And in the morning, when the sun rose over Boston, this family, imperfect, unconventional, beautifully broken and healing, would wake up together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.